Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I leave the library and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. I'm glad to have you joining me on my walk home. It is April 8th, both the Eclipse Day and also Rex Manning Day. If you're not familiar with the teenage comedy Empire Records, today is the day to try it out. It is late 90s goof fest. It's kind of silly, but it's also a little utopian. About a bunch of no-good-nicks who work at a record store, and they're living their best lives, but the record store's in financial trouble. The question is, can they maintain their wacky spirit in the face of corporate degradation? It's a good movie. It's got lots of people who went on to become big stars, and worth checking out if you get a chance. Empire Records. I like it. In the movie centers around something that happens all in one day, including a visit by a sort of has-been celebrity called Rex Manning. So they call it Rex Manning Day. Somebody figured out that the movie takes place on April 8th, and so April 8th is Rex Manning Day. There it is. Well, on my walk home today, I thought I would talk with you a little bit about a podcast from 9 months ago, reflecting the timeliness of the Pick Up and Deliver recording schedule. No, actually what it does is it reflects the way that I listen to podcasts, which is I have some podcasts that I put on the beginning of my podcast feed, and then I have a bunch that I put on the end of my podcast feed. The idea is the ones that are on the beginning, I encounter pretty quickly, and then the ones that are not as timely or important to me, I put on the end of the feed, but then I'm encountering them in chronological order. So whenever I start listening to podcasts, I'll listen to 2 or 3 that are contemporary that just came out, and then I'll listen to 2 or 3 that are pretty old. And occasionally I have to go and clear a bunch out because the podcast feed I have limited at 200 in the queue, and whenever I stop and listen to an audiobook, that gets backed up. But anyway, I recently listened to Cardboard Philosophy episode 10, Our House Rules Good, featuring Austin Harrison from IV Studios. So I enjoyed that episode, and I thought that I would crib their topic for this episode of the podcast. Basically what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about house rules that I enjoy, when I think it is worthwhile or not worthwhile to house rule a game, and just generally talk house rules. So my first instinct is you should not house rule games. The default should be don't house rule, because designers spend a lot of time playtesting their games, and most of the time when you house rule something, you're actually creating a problem that they've already thought about. And I would say the biggest caveat to that is that sometimes the problem that you're trying to fix is a feature, not a bug, right? That this is a thing that they want the game to do, and so you trying to house rule to fix it is actually undoing what the game is supposed to do. Now, the caveat part would be that maybe as a player, you actually want the game to do something different than the game is actually designed to do. An example here might be, a perfect example would be Ark Nova. Ark Nova is mostly a tableau builder that is heads down, working on your own stuff, and sometimes there are cards that interfere with other players. Now, this apparently was divisive enough that they came up with an official variant for the negative cards. Because on the negative cards, they have a little power at the bottom that gives you an alternate power to use as a positive for yourself rather than a negative to other people if you're playing the solo mode. And there is a variant in the rulebook that says if you prefer not to play a game where the players are attacking each other, you can just use the blue solo power anytime that you play one of these cards. So that's kind of a house rule, but of course it's a variant approved by the designer, so it's not really a house rule per se. But that's fixing a problem that the designer obviously did not think was a problem, the conflict part, but playtesters or players made enough stink about it that they said, yeah, you could do it this way. So all of that is to say, often when you house rule something, you are addressing an issue that might be an issue for you, but the designers probably thought of that and saw it. I will say, all right, so I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the house rules we use and why we use them. The first one is the house rule for poison in Gloomhaven. Now, the community in Gloomhaven came up with this. I heard it from somebody else who heard it from a forum. But basically in Gloomhaven, if your character is poisoned, the next heal that you get, the poison takes the entire heal. So it demands a kind of management of your healing so that you're using a 1 or 2 heal to get rid of your poison and not wasting a good 3 or 4 heal when all it does is get rid of your poison. Now this is true for the enemies as well, that if the enemy is poisoned and then they heal, they don't get the benefit of the whole heal, the heal gets eaten up by the poison. So there's a mix, it's good for you, or it's bad for you, but it's also bad for the enemies. But our experience was generally that heals were hard to get and hard to come by, and having to waste them all to get rid of 1 poison felt bad. It was a feel bad, and we didn't enjoy it. So we house ruled it, and we said that when you do a heal, the first point of the heal gets rid of the poison, and the rest of it works to heal you. But the enemies also get that same benefit. For me, that is a sort of quality of life issue that's fine, especially in a cooperative game. Now, cooperative games, I find house rules much less likely to be bad because it's just about how easy or hard do you make the game for your own group, right? You're not advantaging one player over another, although I suppose arguably one player might advance better. There might be some roles that benefit from this healing rule better than other roles, but we don't particularly care about that. Now, other kinds of house ruling I find less acceptable without careful thought. The classic is Monopoly, where a lot of families put extra money on. I think the Cardboard Philosophy folks brought that example up. Families felt bad about kids running out of money so quickly, so they started adding extra money to the table that you could get by landing on free parking. And the result is that the game just takes longer, because the whole point of Monopoly is you're supposed to run out of money. So if you introduce more money in, it just takes the game longer to get to its inevitable end, which is running out of money. For competitive games, generally the only house rules that I've used are ones that take away some of the unfairness of different elements of the game. A couple examples would be, I prefer drafting variants for things like Terraforming Mars over just the draw cards variant, because often if somebody gets a bunch of cards that work for them and someone else doesn't get any cards that work for them, then the person who got the good card draw does better. Now, arguably drafting is actually the same problem. If you draw a hand of cards that don't work for you, then the one card you take, then the next set of cards you get have one fewer card, and presumably the other person took the best card. The big difference would be that in Terraforming Mars, different cards work best for different people. So presumably you would have some access to good cards. But it is a potential problem. But that isn't really a house rule. That is in the rule book, I believe, the drafting cards element. I'm trying to think of other house rules that we use. When we play Arkham Horror, we usually put an extra +1 in the bag because we like the game to be a little easier. When we're playing 2-player, we take 4 actions each instead of 3. And we find in 3-player, 3 actions is just fine. I mean, it's difficult, but 4 actions makes it too easy at 3-player. The one competitive house rule I can think of is, last time I played Shipyard, I watched the Heavy Cardboard teaching video, and they talk about the one house rule that they use for Shipyard is, instead of dealing everybody a couple private goals, they put out all of the goals that are dealt onto the public stage, and as a player you get to pick one from each group that you want to score at the end of the game. Again, this is responding to a perception in the community that some of those goals are better than others. The reality is, when we played, some players found it confusing to have all these goals available and ultimately didn't work toward any of them, whereas they might have worked toward them had they had a goal that they got dealt. So it probably was a wash in terms of the choice to go with that house rule. I will say I agree with the Cardboard Philosophy folks that I don't like it. I don't usually use variants. Sometimes the designers will offer you a bunch of different variants to tweak the game to the group's desire, and I understand that, and I appreciate when designers articulate why or which variants are sort of approved, but I really do want the designer to tell me how the game should be played first. You can have the variants in the back maybe, but I want to know, here is the preferred design. Here's the preferred way this game is going to work. That just makes more sense to me. An example of this would be Obsession, which has a bunch of different variants for how the market works or how different things happen. And as a player, you have to decide which one you're going to do. I think it could be better about foregrounding which goes where, but that might be a problem with the rulebook more than the game. Well, this is a relatively short episode, but I don't have a ton more to say about house rules. So I'm going to pass it over to you, dear listeners. In the forum, one suggested name for it for you listeners is the PUD Pals, PUD being pick up and deliver. Another option would be Pick Up Pals. I'm happy with either of those. So friends, listeners, PUD Pals, what are some of the house rules you use? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your thoughts there. I look forward to hearing how you tweak games when you play them so that I can tweak my games when I play them. If you want to reach out to me, you can email me, Brendan at Rattlebox Games, or send me a direct message on Board Game Geek. Wombat929 is my username there. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.